Station 1. Follow that man. Mark 14:12-17. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you for the Passover?" So he sent 2 of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him and say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. Station 2. Servant leadership. John 13:4-12. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he had wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you'll understand." "No," said Peter, "you should never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you will have no part with me." When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" Behind the scenes. Sandals were the exclusive footwear in first century Middle East. Open sandals produced dirty feet that walked on dusty roads all day long. There would no doubt be significant dirt and grime caked on everyone's feet. When it came to an evening dinner meal, it was customary for a servant or whoever had the lowest status in the house to wash the feet of the guests. When the disciples gathered to celebrate the Passover, no one offered to wash anyone's feet. No one but Jesus. Jesus demonstrated ultimate servant leadership and schooled the disciples in how they must do the same. Reflection. After washing the disciples' feet, Jesus asked, "Do you understand what I have done for you?" Imagine you're at the Passover, sitting there with dirty, grimy feet. Jesus comes over to you, washes your feet, and asks, "Do you understand what I have done for you?" How would you respond? Station 3. Is it I? John 13:21-22. Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, "Truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." Behind the scenes. The news that Jesus was going to be betrayed by one of their own hits the disciples like a ton of bricks. They were shocked and hurt by Jesus' statement, for this was the last thing they had expected to hear. In fact, they were stunned into silence as an awesome hush fell over the room. Each man began to look at the others to find some trace of guilt on the face of one of them. Each calculated in his own mind who the traitor might be. But the disciples could not come to any conclusion, so they began to discuss among themselves who the guilty one might be. As the discussion progressed, each disciple was hit with the awful realization that he could be the betrayer. When Christ had first announced the betrayal, each of them had been confident of their own innocence. But now, each one of them began to shrink with doubt. One by one, the guests at the table asked Jesus, "Lord, is it I?" Jesus remained silent until the last disciple had approached him with a crucial question. He wanted each person in the room to examine themselves. Reflection. If you were in the room that night, what weakness in your life would have caused a shadow of guilt to fall over you to ask the question, "Lord, is it I?" Station 4. Love Betrayed. John 13, 23 to 27. The disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one whom I'm giving this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, "What you are about to do, do quickly." Behind the scenes. Beyond the Passover, there were many celebrations and holidays that the Jewish people participated in on a regular basis. During these celebrations, it was common as a symbol of friendship and respect for another that a piece of challah, a braided bread, was dipped in salt and then offered by hand. Accepting and eating the challah was an affirmation of the offered friendship. Though the Bible does not specifically reference the challah, nor would it have been at a Passover meal, since there would only be unleavened bread without yeast there, those familiar with this Jewish custom would see this symbolism when Jesus says to Peter, "It is the one to whom I'm giving this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Jesus answers John's direct question with a very graphic and touching picture by practicing this familiar Jewish custom. He took a piece of bread and dipped it into a special sauce that was on the table. He then offered it to Judas. This gesture was showing the disciples who the betrayer was, and simultaneously, Jesus offers Judas one more chance to repent of his evil plan. Judas stood on the brink between life and death, heaven and hell. But he stayed with his earlier decision to turn against Jesus, and in doing so, rejected Jesus' love and friendship. As soon as Judas takes the bread, that's the moment Jesus calls his bluff. He sees through Judas' charade and says, "What you are about to do, do quickly." Reflection. Imagine you are having a meal with Jesus at a Jewish celebration. It's loud, people are telling stories, laughing, music is being played in the background. In this joy-filled moment, Jesus takes a piece of challah, dips it, and offers it to you. How do you respond? Station 5, a new covenant. Matthew 26, 26 to 30. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Behind the scenes. There were literally thousands of years of backstory wrapped up in this moment. First, we must understand what a covenant is. A covenant is a chosen relationship or partnership in which two parties make binding promises to each other and work together to reach a common goal. They're often accompanied by oaths, signatures, and ceremonies. Covenants contain defined obligations and commitments, but differ from a contract in that they are relational and personal. Think of marriage. In love, a husband and wife choose to enter into a formal relationship, binding themselves to one another in lifelong faithfulness and devotion. They then work as partners to reach a common goal, like building a career or raising children together. That's a covenant. Through the Old Testament, God had established 4 covenants. The first with Noah, that God would never again destroy the world by water. The second with Abraham, that God would bless Abraham's family for generations. The third with Moses, that God would take the Israelites out of slavery and lead them to the promised land. The fourth with David, that the Messiah, the ultimate king, would come from David's family. When Jesus says, "This is the new covenant," Jesus is hitting reset on all the covenants that came before. From now on, through what will soon be his death and resurrection, Jesus will be the only pathway for all people to be in relationship with God. In this covenant, we would never be destroyed. We would be forever blessed, never be bound to slavery, and have Jesus rule as the ultimate king. The old is gone, the new has come. Reflection. Have you ever made a covenant or commitment to God? If so, take time and remember that moment. If not, is today your day? Station 6, the garden. Matthew 26:39, Luke 22:44. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling on the ground. Behind the scenes, sweating blood is an actual medical condition called hematohydrosis. Under extreme emotional stress, blood vessels expand so much so that they break into the net of sweat glands that they are surrounded by. Interesting that the account of Jesus sweating blood is found in the Gospel of Luke. Luke was a physician before following Jesus as a disciple. Reflection. Have you ever experienced a crisis? A moment where you were completely overwhelmed with anxiety, where you couldn't move? The Bible never promises to take our pain or suffering away, but it does prepare us to respond and endure when it happens. If you are currently facing any kind of pain, pressure, or anxiety, take a piece of paper, write down a word or phrase, tie it to the tree here in the garden, and give it to Jesus. Station 7, Judas's kiss. Matthew 26:45-50. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. Behind the scenes. In the culture of first-century Israel, a kiss was not always a romantic expression of love. Rather, a kiss on the cheek was a common greeting, a sign of deep respect, honor, and brotherly love. For a student who had great respect for his teacher, a kiss fell well within the healthy expression of honor. What really stands out in Judas's betrayal is that he used such an intimate expression of love and respect to betray Jesus. Judas's actions were hypocritical in the extreme. His actions said, "I respect and honor you." Yet at the exact time he was betraying Jesus to be murdered. Judas's actions illustrate Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Often foes disguise themselves as friends. Evil often wears a mask to conceal its true purpose. Reflection. Have you been let down, sabotaged, or betrayed by a friend? In Matthew 26:50, Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Even in the middle of the most well-known act of betrayal in history, Jesus still calls Judas friend. Jesus' love goes beyond words and actions. When you feel let down by others, how do you respond? Station 8, 2 swords. Before we go further, we have to return to the upper room for a moment. The last thing Jesus said before they left that room wasn't sentimental. It was about swords. If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Swords? This is the same Jesus who just washed the disciples' feet. The same Jesus who said to love your enemies. The same Jesus who called peacemakers blessed. Why swords? Then Peter, ever the eager one, blurts out, "See, Lord, here are 2 swords." Jesus simply replies, "That's enough." 2 swords? For 12 men? Against Rome? Jesus wasn't arming a rebellion. He was fulfilling a prophecy. He knew the cross was coming, but Rome didn't crucify peaceful teachers for being inspirational. Rome crucified rebels, insurrectionists. By allowing his disciples to carry swords, even just 2, Jesus ensured that when the authorities arrived, they wouldn't see a harmless rabbi. They would see the supposed leader of an armed group, just as Isaiah 53:12 foretold. He would be numbered with the transgressors. 2 swords were wildly insufficient for defense, but they were perfectly sufficient to fulfill prophecy. Now back to the garden. When Judas arrived with soldiers and temple guards, Peter grabbed one of those swords and did what we all do when fear gets loud. He started swinging. The blade struck Malchus, the servant of the high priest, and cut off his right ear. In that moment, Peter crossed a line. Assault, armed resistance, violence against the high priest's servant. Rome could have easily added Peter's cross beside Jesus. But Jesus said, "No more of this." He told Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? Do you think I cannot call on my Father and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" Jesus wasn't outnumbered. He was choosing. Then he reached out, touched Malchus's ear, and healed him. The last miracle before the cross wasn't calming a storm or raising the dead. It was repairing the damage caused by one of his own followers. In that moment, Jesus did 2 things at once. He restored his enemy and he protected his friend. Because if there's no wound, there's no charge. Reflection. The final miracle before the cross was quiet, healing an enemy's ear in the dark. Jesus didn't just preach forgiveness. He practiced mercy in real time. Is there someone in your life who feels like Malchus? Someone on the other side of a wound or conflict? What would mercy look like there? Not pretending it didn't hurt, not excusing what happened, just choosing to heal instead of escalate. Because the kingdom Jesus brought doesn't spread by force, it spreads by mercy. Station 9, Trials. Behind the scenes. Starting immediately after his arrest in the early hours of Friday morning and continuing through the night, Jesus was taken through 6 court-like trials. Every authority he faced either lacked the power to sentence him to death or could find no real fault in him at all. Still, the religious leaders were determined to see him crucified. None of these trials were legitimate, even according to their own laws. Jesus had no legal representation, no defense, no advocate speaking on his behalf. Instead, the night was filled with injustice, false accusations, and physical abuse. Here's how it unfolded. Trial 1. Jesus was brought before Annas, the former high priest who still held a significant influence with the Romans. Trial 2. Annas could not find cause to punish him, but he sent Jesus to the Sanhedrin, Israel's ruling council. Trial 3. The Sanhedrin manufactured charges and sent Jesus to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, who had the authority to issue a death sentence. Trial 4. Pilate concluded that Jesus was innocent and recognized the religious leaders' false motives. Because the accusations were religious in nature, Pilate tried to pass responsibility back to them. Instead, he sent Jesus to Herod, the local king. Trial 5. Herod also found no guilt in Jesus and sent him back to Pilate. Trial 6. Pilate again declared Jesus innocent, and in a final attempt to release him, he offered the crowd a choice: Jesus or a known criminal named Barabbas. Reflection. Have you ever been the victim of injustice? What happens? Where does your heart go? Do you fight back? Do you replay the moment in your mind? Do you want revenge for the ways you've been wronged? Throughout these trials, Jesus trusted his Father, even in the middle of false accusations and unfair treatment. He remained steady in his purpose. He knew that God was still at work, even in the injustice. And that same hope is offered to us. As Romans 8:28 reminds us, God is able to work all things together for the good of those who love him, even in the moments that feel unfair, even in the nights that feel unjust. Station 10, 30 pieces of silver. Matthew 27, 1-5. Early in the morning after Jesus' arrest, the chief priests and elders of the people made their plans on how to have him executed. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas Iscariot, the one who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. "I have sinned," he said, "for I have betrayed innocent blood." "What do we care?" they replied. "That's your problem." So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Behind the scenes, scholars estimate that 30 pieces of silver would have been worth roughly 4 months' wages of a laborer. But the number 30 itself carries deeper meaning. In the Hebrew scriptures, 30 pieces of silver was the legal value of a slave. In the book of Exodus 21:32, if a slave was killed, the owner was compensated with 30 shekels of silver. The price placed on Jesus was the price of a slave, a life that would change the world, valued at the lowest legal amount. Biblical teachers often note that Judas's story is more complicated than simple greed. Having followed Jesus for 3 years as his disciple, Judas had seen miracles, heard the teachings, and witnessed the growing movement around his rabbi. Some believe Judas may have become disillusioned with Jesus' refusal to pursue political power. Others suggest Judas believed so strongly that Jesus was the Messiah that he tried to force a revolution, create a crisis where Jesus would finally be forced into action and overthrow Rome and establish his kingdom. But when Jesus did not resist, when he did not call down angels, when he did not seize power, Judas began to realize something. This was not unfolding the way he had imagined. Jesus' kingdom was not about power. It was about people. And in that moment, the weight of what he had done came crashing in. Judas cried out, "I have betrayed innocent blood." Reflection. Disappointment can be one of the hardest parts of faith. Sometimes we expect God to act in a certain way, solve a problem, change a circumstance, bring justice or healing in the timing we hope for. When it doesn't happen the way we imagined, we can feel confused, hurt, or even betrayed. Judas had expectations for Jesus, but Jesus' mission was far bigger than Judas could see. Is there an area of your life where you feel disappointed with God? A prayer that seems unanswered? A story that hasn't turned out the way you hoped? The cross reminds us that even when we cannot see the whole story, God is still writing one, and His purposes are often far greater than what we can understand in the moment. Take a moment here. Offer your disappointment honestly to God and ask Him to help you trust the larger story He is unfolding. Station 11, Barabbas, Matthew 27:15-22. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him!" "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate, but they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" Behind the scenes, Pilate attempted to release Jesus in 3 different ways. First, sending him to Herod. Second, bartering with the crowd to choose Jesus over Barabbas. Third, having him severely flogged to appease the crowd instead of crucifixion. Station 12, Flogging and Humiliation, John 19:1-3. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Behind the scenes, the flagrum. The flagrum was a whip the Romans used often when scourging. It was common for there to be pieces of rock, metal, or even bone embedded in the braids of each strand. The Romans were so proficient at that art of torture that they knew exactly how many lashes they could inflict without killing the subject. The crown of thorns. Most of the time when we hear the word crown, we think of luxury and nobility. The glamorous accessory that pops into our minds includes gold, silver, and precious gems. However, Jesus' crown of thorns was a different story. The most basic of materials was wrapped around in the shape of a circle, only to be pressed into his holy head. Instead of the crown representing honor and respect, this crown was intended to mock and humiliate. Purple robe. In Bible times, clothing for the common people was usually drab and unbleached. It was hand-woven, usually from sheep or goat's wool. Only the rich could afford expensive dyed cloth. Purple was the most rare due to the difficulty in producing the color. Therefore, it was more commonly found among the rich and royal. Roman soldiers could afford beautiful clothing since they were paid well, but they also could take whatever they wanted from captive people. We don't know where the robe came from, but we do know why the soldiers used it. The robe, the crown of thorns, and the reed for a scepter were all props to mock and humiliate. Reflection. Think through the experience of followers of Jesus who would have witnessed this in person. They believed Jesus was the Messiah. Put yourself in their place for a moment. What do you think they felt? What questions would they have been thinking? Jesus' disciples and followers would have expected a different ending to the story. They would have expected a fight to the end, not a journey to death. What happens when things in your life don't turn out the way you expected? How do you respond? What do you say to God? What does He say to you? Station 13, Sentencing. John 19, 4-6, 16. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Behind the scenes. Pilate finds himself trapped in a difficult political situation. As the Roman governor of Judea, his primary responsibility is simple: keep the peace. Any unrest during Passover, when Jerusalem swelled with pilgrims, could quickly turn into a dangerous uprising. Pilate appears to recognize that Jesus is innocent of the accusations being made against him. The Gospels record several attempts by Pilate to avoid sentencing him. He sends Jesus to Herod. He offers the crowd a choice between Jesus and Barabbas. He even has Jesus brutally flogged, hoping the punishment will satisfy the crowd without requiring an execution. But the religious leaders escalate the pressure. At one point, they warn Pilate, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar." For a Roman governor, this was a dangerous accusation. Being labeled disloyal to Caesar could cost Pilate his position, or worse. In the end, Pilate makes a decision not based on justice, but on fear and political survival. Reflection. Fear can be a powerful motivator. Sometimes we know the right thing to do, but we choose the safer option instead. A decision that protects our reputation, our position, our comfort. Pilate knew Jesus was innocent, but fear of what others might think and what it might cost him shaped his decision. Have you ever made a decision out of fear? A decision that you knew was wrong, but you did it anyway? What did that decision cost you? Take a moment here. Invite Jesus into those places in your life where fear has shaped your decisions. Ask him for the courage to choose what is right, even when it costs you something. Station 14, the weight of the cross. Luke 23, 26-28. As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Behind the scenes. It was a Roman custom to make the prisoner carry their own cross to the site of the crucifixion. This would heap even more humiliation on the victim. Therefore, Jesus was led through the crowded streets of Jerusalem carrying his heavy cross. With all the physical trauma his body endured over the past 12 hours, Jesus was weak and exhausted. It wasn't long until he collapsed under the weight of the cross and was unable to continue without assistance. Reflection. It is unclear whether Jesus had to carry only the horizontal piece, the patibulum, of the cross, or the whole cross. In either case, historians believe that at the very least, the cross would have been 70 pounds. 32 kilograms, or as much as 300 pounds, 136 kilograms. The cross at this station is an accurate representation of the size and weight of a full cross. Touch it, move it, lift it, and feel the gravity of this instrument of torture. Positioning of the victim. Historically, the cross would have been laid on the ground. The hands were nailed to the cross first. Nailing of the feet was a more delicate matter. Soldiers had to make sure that the knees of the condemned were bent when they fastened them to the wood. This was done to exhaust the legs under the weight of the victim's body, inflicting the maximum amount of pain over an extended period of time. Lifting the cross. Once Jesus' hands and feet were nailed in place, the 4 soldiers lifted up the cross with Jesus on it and slid the vertical shaft, stipes, into a hole dug for the occasion. The jolt of the cross falling into the hole would have been a tremendous shock to the body. Cause of death. The length of time required to reach death could range from hours to days depending on prior injuries and/or scourging. The victim is placed in a specific posture on the cross with knees bent and arms outstretched for the purpose of exhausting the subject to the point of death by asphyxiation. The suspended body by the outstretched arms would be so excruciating that the victim would attempt to stand up on their nail-pierced feet to take a few breaths before the pain or exhaustion made it impossible to continue. They would then slowly lose the ability to breathe. At this point, they would attempt to stand up again to take in air. Death would occur when the victim could no longer hoist themselves up to breathe and consequently suffocate. Station 16, verbal assaults, Matthew 27:39-43. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him." Behind the scenes. Their logic was literal. If Jesus was strong enough to tear down the temple and in 3 days raise it up again, which he predicted would happen only a few days earlier, surely he was strong enough to save himself from the cross. The fact that he stayed on the cross and did not save himself convinced the crowd that he was a hoax. 3 times while Jesus was on the cross, people taunted him, mocked him that he should save himself. The irony is that, in that very moment, Jesus was saving them. Station 17, my God, Matthew 27:45-46. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Behind the scenes. Rabbis in Jesus' day often used a teaching technique called a remez. A rabbi would quote a short line from scripture while teaching or speaking, trusting that the audience knew the passage well enough to recognize the larger story being referenced. Because the Old Testament did not yet have chapter and verse numbers in the 1st century, quoting the opening line of a passage worked like a reference point. It pointed listeners to the specific section of scripture. So when Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He wasn't declaring abandonment. Quite the opposite. He was pointing to Psalm 22. Psalm 22 was written about 1,000 years earlier, yet it describes details that closely mirror what was happening at the crucifixion. In its 31 verses, there are 16 prophetic moments that foreshadow the death of Jesus. Here are a few lines from Psalm 22 and the New Testament accounts of fulfilling that very specific prophecy. In the Old Testament, Psalm 22 verses 7-8 say, "All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him." In the New Testament, Matthew 27 verses 41-43 say this, "In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him." Psalm 22 verse 16 says, "They pierce my hands and my feet." In the New Testament, Matthew 27 verse 35 says, "The soldiers nailed Jesus to a cross." In Psalm 22 verse 18, it says, "They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." Mark 15 verse 24 says, "And they crucified him, dividing up his clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get." Reflection. Altogether, Jesus fulfilled more than 300 Old Testament prophecies about the coming Messiah, over 30 of them in the final 24 hours leading up to his crucifixion. How does the fulfillment of prophecy shape your understanding of who Jesus is? Station 18, 3 crosses. Matthew 27:39, Luke 23:39-43. 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said. "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Pastor and evangelist Alistair Begg provides a humorous and insightful reflection of the 2 criminals crucified next to Jesus. "I've always wondered about the guy on the 3rd cross. You know the one, the thief who hung beside Jesus. One day, I'd love to find him in heaven and ask how that whole thing played out when he got there. I imagine him walking up to the gates, still a little stunned that he even made it. An angel greets him and he says, 'Hey, what are you doing here?' The man shrugs. 'I'm not really sure.' The angel looks down at his clipboard. 'Okay, well, let's start with the basics. Have you been baptized?' 'No.' 'Okay, did you attend church regularly?' 'Nope.' 'Bible study?' 'Never been to one.' 'Do you understand the doctrine of justification by faith?' The man pauses. 'Never even heard of that.' The angel flips a page. 'Well then, what about substitutionary atonement?' The man looks even more confused. 'I have no idea what that means.' Now the angel is starting to sweat a little. 'Hang on,' he says, 'let me get my supervisor.' A few moments later, another angel walks up, clearly the one who handles complicated cases. He looks at the man and says, "All right, we just have one question for you." The thief nods nervously. "On what basis are you here?" The man smiles and says, "The man on the middle cross said I could come." Reflection. There are 3 crosses on that hill. One man is dying in his sin. One man is dying to his sin. And one man is dying for sin. 2 criminals, both guilty, both broken, but one of them realizes something in his final moments. The man in the middle isn't just another victim. He's the Savior. And with his last breath, he prays the simplest prayer imaginable. Jesus, remember me. No resume, no good works, no second chances to clean up his life, just faith. The message is unmistakable. When you turn to Jesus, even in your final moment, you'll see that grace has always been pursuing you. Have you ever felt unworthy? Not good enough? That you need to have your life all cleaned up before coming to Jesus? Take a moment and reflect on what grace means to you. Station 19, the Centurion's Declaration, Matthew 27:51 and 54, Luke 23:46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining. The earth shook, the rocks split. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Reflection. Do you have someone in your life who seems resistant to Jesus? Someone who dismisses faith or shows little interest in God? The centurion's job was to oversee executions. Yet even he saw something different in Jesus. His story reminds us that hearts can change in unexpected moments. Never stop praying for the people in your life who feel far from God. Take a moment now to pray for someone who needs to encounter Jesus as their Messiah. Ask God to open their eyes and ask how God might use you through your words, your love, or your example to help them see Him more clearly. Station 20, the curtain torn, Luke 23:44-46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. Behind the scenes, the temple in Jerusalem was built with a small, very specific room inside called the Holy of Holies, or the throne room. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, and it was said that the physical presence of God on earth resides. There was a very special crafted curtain, thick, ornate, and massive, that covered the entrance to the throne room and created a barrier that separated our sinful world from a holy God. The Jewish tradition was that only the high priest would be allowed to enter the throne room once a year during Passover to offer sacrifices for the forgiveness of the people's sin for that past year. The tearing of the curtain in the temple was significant, not only because it happened, but also in the way it happened. The curtain was torn from top to bottom. This indicated that God Himself did the tearing. Now, through Jesus, there is nothing that separates us from God. The curtain represented all the laws the Israelites followed in an effort to maintain a right standing with God. This was the Old Covenant. The curtain torn in two was the final act God used to show that Jesus had created a new covenant. The old sacrificial system to receive forgiveness is gone. Jesus became the ultimate sacrifice for the forgiveness of sin. Access to God is no longer restricted to a single priest, a single day, or a single place. Because of Jesus, the way into God's presence is always open. Reflection. For centuries, the curtain in the temple reminded people that something stood between them and God. But when Jesus gave his life, that barrier was torn away. Nothing now separates us from the love of God. As you walk through the torn curtain, take a few moments to reflect on the sacrifice Jesus made so that you could come freely into the presence of the Father. Bring your gratitude. Bring your burdens. Bring your whole heart. Because of Jesus, you are always welcome in the presence of God.
As we head towards communion, if you don't have elements with you right now in this moment, we just encourage you to pause this video, go grab some, and then resume the video when you're ready. How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished.
You just spent the last number of minutes following the jar, seeing the cross, asking, is it I? It's an honest question of faith, isn't it? It reminds me of that last evening the disciples spent with Jesus. If they were to be honest, I don't think they knew what was coming. Some of them would reject him, run from him, deny him, and one even betray him. And then Jesus does something that I don't think any of us would do, knowing full well what they were gonna do, what was gonna happen. He kneels down, wraps his tunic around his waist, and washes their feet. You would think he would reject them, and instead he welcomed them near. I don't know, maybe when you think of coming close to Jesus, you wonder if your story is too messy or too confusing or too difficult that he might reject you instead of welcome you. As you've walked through this experience, our hope is that that's not the message you receive. You've seen that it was a choice for Jesus to go to the cross, a choice for him to endure the pain and the agony of what was to come. And yet, he didn't reject, he offered love. So as we come to this communion table today, I hope you see that you can bring your full self. All of you are. Not to experience a pushing aside or a denying of you, but an invitation of love and welcome and hope and promise that Jesus offers. Because on that day, the veil was torn and he provided a way to God that gave access to every one of us. So before we take communion, I wonder if you just take a moment to reflect, to come near, to be welcome at the table. On that night Jesus was betrayed, he took some bread that was at the table and he broke it. And he looked at his disciples and he said, "Take, eat, and remember me." And he grabbed some of the wine that was at the table they had just shared together. And he said, "This is a symbol of my blood poured out for you, a new way, that pathway of love where you're welcome. Take and drink and remember me."
I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, nor wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart, his wounds have paid my ransom.
We're grateful that you joined us today online. I want to invite you to not only experience Easter right here at the same place, but also each and every weekend you can join us online and be welcome into this community of faith.